Okay, looks like we're about at 4 o'clock, so thank you for making your announcement early. That's great, and thanks everybody for being here and paying attention. Do we have any other announcements? I don't think I'm aware of any. But yeah, you might want to think about, we have a rare treat to have the U.S. Special Envoy to North Korea for human rights issues tomorrow at noon in this room. We don't have official ambassadorial relationship with North Korea, so he's the special envoy, but he's a level of the ambassador, and he's a great guy, and you won't meet many who know more about North Korea than him. And a fascinating part of the world and tough place to know about. So please, if you're interested at all in those kinds of issues, tomorrow at noon with Ambassador King should be a treat. Okay, yeah, I think that must be everything. Today for our career lecture, we're really pleased to welcome Matt Asay, who is Vice President of Corporate Strategy for all these cool companies have to have cool names. So Tengen, I guess, is the way you say this. It's written 10GEN. And he is one of the technology industry's foremost business strategists on open source, with a decade of experience building and advising open source companies. Matt received BAs in English and Political Science from Brigham Young University and an MA in International Conflict Analysis from the University of Kent and a JD from Stanford University. And he serves as advisor to several open source companies and founded the Open Source Business Conference and writes a regular column for the Register. And we've even got a little plug here for how to follow him on Twitter. So this is a fascinating opportunity to hear from somebody who has turned their interest in political science, law, and international affairs into a career in technology companies and all this coolness that I would aspire to if I had a cool bone in my body. So welcome, Matt, today.
Well, the great thing is you don't have to be cool in technology. In fact, the bigger the nerd you are, the better off you are.
Awesome. So, okay, good.
Yeah.
Good.
So I will strive to be interesting. Where I fail, I have videos. If those fail, you are welcome to leave at any point. I have kids. I'm used to being ignored, so it's not going to hurt my feelings. And I will just make one amendment, and that is that I didn't have a BA in political science. I did have one in English. I was one class, Poli-Sci 110, shy of a minor in political science, but I was so determined to get through my undergrad that I didn't stop to actually do the class. I finished at BYU in 2.5 years. I was sprinting dead on through the whole thing, not because I didn't like BYU, but just because I was determined to grow up. And I'll go through that a little bit as I kind of walk through the arc of my career, because I've had this urge to grow up all throughout. Ever since I started at BYU, I was determined to get up and then go to grad school, and then determined to find some sort of a job that would take care of my interests. Just so I know, if anyone knows where I'm supposed to point this, okay, so that it'll.
I think generally that direction. Is that true? Okay.
Is that it? Okay, so. The basic premise of my presentation is everything that you think you know about what you want to do, you are wrong. You have no clue. If you are aware of black swan theory, your life is a black swan, and I'll come back to that. So it's great that you have ideas and ideals of what you want to do with your lives. Keep those until they're cruelly smashed on the rocks, and everything that you believed that you were good at, God will put to the test, and you'll find that you'll end up doing something completely different. So this was me. In high school, just as I graduated from high school, this was the Gulf War was going on, and I had the side of my Honda Civic shot out by someone probably from Spanish Fork with a 30-06 because I had anti-war signs on my car, and I had our home phone programmed to be from Malcolm X telling the world that they were all white supremacists and should leave us alone. My parents didn't like that very much, made me change it. And then I found out I had all these ideals, and life kind of changed what I was going to do. I was going to be president of the United States. I should have been there going up against Barack Obama last night. Probably wouldn't have done as well as Mitt Romney did, but that was my goal. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my industry because technology may or may not sound that interesting to you, but the way that I got into, I'm in a corner of the industry, and actually if I were to list 3 big trends in technology, mobile's one, big data's one, and open source is the other. I fell very serendipitously into the beginning of this open source movement, and it's actually really interesting, regardless of whether you care about business or technology. The traditional software industry is based on this premise that you write some great software, you package it up, you lock it down, you make it proprietary, and then you sell it and you make a gazillion dollars. And that's if you think of some products that you may know about like Microsoft, Office, or Windows, that's the traditional software industry. And it's worked for decades. The modern software industry has changed that a little bit, and you have companies like Google, like Twitter, and there's a kind of a saying that goes in the tech world, if you aren't paying for the product, you are the product. And that is certainly the case with all of these companies. You think you're using Twitter because you want to talk to people, you think you're using Facebook because you want to converse with your friends. Everything you do is being mined. All the data that you spit out as to what you like and the brands you follow and the people you talk to and the conversations you have, the things you search for, it's all designed to serve you ads more efficiently. That's the modern software industry. And so they're not selling software anymore, we're selling you or the things that you do. Open source is a little bit different. And actually all of these web companies, Google, et cetera, are built on open source software. They could not exist without open source software. What is open source? Open source is go back to that original premise of you're building this software and do everything the same except give that software away for free and make it possible for anybody to come in and look at the recipe, at the code, at the product, exactly how you made it, and you give it away to them. It turns out this is a really bad business model in terms of making money. At least for years we thought, and Professor Hawkins talked about the conference that I started. Well, the conference I started was for years people were building this open source software, but nobody had a clue as to how to make any money from it. And so I started this conference to get smart people together to figure out, well, how do you make money from this stuff? Because if you're giving away your crown jewels, think of it like a recipe to the food. You're in the restaurant business, and you're giving away you're not only selling the food, but you're giving away the recipes for how you make the food. That's kind of like what the open source software industry is. Your competitors can go out and take that recipe and build the exact same thing or make the exact same meal that you do. You're betting that they're not going to want to. And sometimes you're right and sometimes you're wrong. But that's the industry. Is you write the same software and you give it away for free. What that solves is your biggest problem as a startup technology company is not protecting your IP, your intellectual property. Your biggest problem is finding people who actually care about using your software. So if you make it open source, they can download it for free. How many people here have heard or used Firefox, their web browser? That's open source software. Every time you use Google, you're using massive quantities of open source software that are running on remote servers. If you've heard, and probably most people haven't, if you've ever been unlucky enough to have to use OpenOffice, which is kind of an open source equivalent of Microsoft Office, it's open source software. It's not one of our finest moments. Twitter. Every time you see your Twitter count in terms of number of followers, you have the mechanics on the back end is an open source project called Storm that does real-time analytics of everything that you're doing on the site. So open source now powers the planet, the technology planet, the cars that you're driving, the infotainment systems and the newest systems. If you're on Delta Airlines or one of these airlines and you're looking at that, watching movies or whatever, all of that's being powered on the back end by open source. The rendering in the Lord of the Rings movies is all being done on open source software running on lots and lots of servers. So it's being used all over the place. In terms of being sold directly, no one's really figured that out yet, which is why it's so interesting. And these are the people that I work with. I work with freaks, and I wish that I were kind of freakish. So this is Mitchell Baker, one of the founders of Mozilla, of Firefox. I'll stay over here. Richard Stallman kind of started the whole free software movement. He calls him Saint Ganusius. He is truly a freak. And he really is just weird. I sat next to him in Boston once. Eric Raymond, who kind of developed a lot of theories around open source. Linus Torvalds, who started Linux, which, again, every time you visit a web page, you are running Linux. Somebody's running Linux. You may not run it on your Mac, although, for that matter, every Mac, all of the software that you're using, all of the stuff that Apple does, is open source software. The operating system that runs on the Mac is open source. Apple being Apple, they've put all sorts of proprietary stuff on top of it because Apple doesn't do anything that's open, but that's how it runs. This is my old boss, Mark Shuttleworth, runs a company called Canonical out of London. He paid $20 million so that he could be the first South African to go up into space, and he's, as my wife will tell you, he's kind of a freak. Chris DeBona runs the open source programs at Google. These are all very individual sort of people. And open source, when I got into technology, this was my connection to my political science background. What political science background I had is open source is a very politicized environment. It's all governed by these licenses that force you to open things up, and how open they are. You'll have nonstop flame wars going back and forth over Twitter or IRC channels and whatnot as to whether somebody's truly open or whether they're just faking it. It's the most I thought that I wasn't going to get into politics. My wife and I worked on political campaigns while I was here at BYU, and I thought, I'm out of this politics. I can't take it anymore. Well, open source is the most political thing I've ever done. You spend all your time debating and trying to work with people on that. The big backdrop against all of this is the world digital has changed everything about how we think about value. Used to be that, and you think about economics 101, price is optimized here where supply meets demand. Well, if you have unlimited supply of software, of whatever it is, of web searches, of et cetera, then it's no longer, the price is no longer determined by how much supply there is and how much demand there is. There's infinite supply. Where we live right now is in this world of abundance, where there's non-stop abundance all the time. And the problem is all these innovations that are coming out get thrown into this mass of other innovations. And the real issue is figuring out how to use it. And so you think about the businesses that probably matter most to you as a consumer. 10Gen, not so much, not yet. Although, all of the stuff that's happening on ESPN.com, all of the stuff that Apple does on where they store their data, it's all stored in our databases. So I will claim some credit for that. But if you think about Apple and Google as just two examples, I'll explain how this abundance theory works. Google works. The reason that people will pay for advertising on Google is because there's so much stuff to filter out. Why do we use Google? Because we're trying to find something. Google now indexes well over 1 trillion websites, web pages. And frankly, nobody has the bandwidth to be able to parse all of that data and figure it out. So Google does it for us. We pay Google in the form of advertising for filtering out all of the cruft that's on the web and helping us to find just one thing. Apple, they have a number of different business models, but one is the reason that, think about the world before iTunes. Maybe you guys didn't exist before iTunes, but I did, and it was all Napster and Kazaa and file sharing, otherwise known as stealing. And you just went out to the web and you downloaded it. And when Apple came out with iTunes and said, no, we'll provide this easy way for people to get it, they'll get high quality downloads and it'll be 99 cents, everybody said, that'll never work. Turns out it does, because Apple takes all of this complexity, all of this free, otherwise free stuff, the music that you can get or the movies, and says, we'll bring it to you right here, we'll make it easy to search, and you pay 99 cents or $2.99 or whatever. Again, it's this idea of filtering out all of this abundance that you can have for free if you wanted. My company does kind of the same thing. This represents kind of the trend of the amount of open source software lines of code being written. We create a database, an open source database called MongoDB. And our business model is we give it away for free, and then we charge for support, we package it for people, make it easy, even easier to use. We do add some functionality for large enterprises. Same sort of principle. You can have it for free. You can go download MongoDB right now for free if you want. But we bet that a number of companies are going to want to pay. But again, it's against this backdrop of abundance. It only works if there's abundance. And all the companies that succeed in my industry are those that figure this out. This idea of filtering out all of the abundance and giving you just some easy choices. And if you think about it, it's not too different from how like retail works. Why does Nordstrom work? There are an infinite number of, maybe not infinite, but there are a lot of different clothing lines that they could stock. What Nordstrom says, you walk into Nordstrom or Target or wherever, is they're saying, we're taking all of that complexity and we're saying, here's a manageable set of choices that you can make, and you will pay us 50% more, or actually 100% markup on these clothes, because we're making it easy for you to figure out what you should want. And this is kind of humble bragging. We're great. Wall Street Journal just did a thing of out of 6,000 companies, they ranked us number 9 and the number 1 software company, so it's kind of cool. In my world, and I hope this works, because for a billionaire, Steve Ballmer, Microsoft's current CEO, can be really gross. And he's kind of gross in this video, but I don't know if it's going to work. We'll see.
Developers, 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 developers. Developers, 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 developers.
Big sweat stains.
Yes!
It's too bad. I hope the next video will work, because in my world, like I said at the beginning, the developers rule. And my mom, I had 4 sisters. My mom, growing up, always told my sisters, date the nerds. She said the nerds are going to be the successful ones. So sorry for any of you who are like football jocks, captain of the baseball team, you're losers in my mom's world. Because it's these guys, it's the developers. They're the ones who figure out, who build these software programs that people are going to use. If you had an interest, and I know this is the Kennedy Center, so everybody here is going to be an ambassador or go into the Foreign Service until you don't. If you were interested in seeing where the jobs are, IT, technology is one of the biggest sectors and fastest growing. And if you want to work in tech, most of the time you got to go to California, which is where we used to live. And then I've been very fortunate to be able to work remotely, and I commute out to the Bay Area or to New York where the company's headquartered. And And if you're thinking about a startup, but at some point, hopefully you will, and you think if you or your spouse or your family says don't work for a startup, it's really risky, consider the fact that of the Fortune 500 in 1995, 87% of the companies that were there in 1995 are no longer on it. It's a big shift. Now, some of them just got smaller, some of them went out of business, some of them got acquired, but there is no security in this world, job security in this world, probably not even for tenured professors. Yeah. In terms of, again, most of you right now are not thinking about technology, but of the technologies up here where the hottest jobs are, where the most jobs are, 6 of the 10 are open source. So just keep that in mind. Skip that. Go back. So what do I do? What is my job? Go back. Let's see. Now, this will be very unfortunate if the video doesn't work.
Scratch.
It's a racing stripe.
Bumper sagging.
I doubt that very much.
This car is crap. I will buy it for next to nothing.
How next to?
Well, here are your options. You can sell it for parts, drive it off a cliff, you can donate it to a person that you'd like to see die in a car crash, or you can sell it to me, and I'll use it as I would a wagon on my farm. It'll be towed by a donkey.
Do I have to pick one of those?
Yes.
Can you go over those options again?
Hey, you know what? You knock $1,500 off the price right now, and I will take it off your hands. It's got to be now.
Well, I
Seal
have
the deal.
the blue
Let's
book
do it.
values.
Let's do this thing. 3, 2, 1.
Can I
5,
think about it?
4, 3, 2. Now, now, now.
Think about
Say
it.
it. Do it
I'm
now.
thinking about
Do
it.
it now.
Thinking.
Do it. Shake my hand. You will sell me this car. Shake my hand.
Yeah. All right.
That's my job. No, actually, so I'm not very, so again, I know that part of this is thinking about future careers. I'm not technical at all, or very little. I get called to like fix the wireless router at my parents' house or something, but I'm not that technical. And despite what this Dilbert cartoon says, you actually can thrive in tech despite not being a techie. It just, you have to choose what you do. In business development, sales, marketing, all these things require taking this geeky technology and turning it into something understandable by average people. And that actually is it's very tough. And again, I know that you guys are thinking, I'm not going to be doing this. I'm going into the foreign service. No, you're probably not. So keep this open as an option, is all I'm saying. I probably shouldn't say that because you're gonna, but let me walk you through how I got here, just in case. So when I was at BYU, I was very fortunate, and part of this I'll give some advice. I was very, very fortunate. I was a research assistant for Stan Taylor, who I don't know if I don't think he still teaches.
He's still around, though. He actually came here and addressed us a couple of weeks ago.
Okay, I think Stan is one of the best people I've ever met. It's just a wonderful person. Although I do remember having a conversation with him once where he said, Matt, I'm not sure that I can't do his teddy bear voice, I'm not sure that we'll get along because you're a conservative and I'm a liberal. We did get along. He wrote a book using literature to explain international relations concepts, and I got to pick and edit all the literature for him, and it was fantastic. But and so this is my first thing, is find somebody here, whether it's Professor Hawkins or somebody else, somebody who can guide you. You're going to end up doing your own thing, but it's a good idea to have a mentor if you can find one. And Stan Taylor was definitely a mentor to me. He was actually, so the next step is in '96, my wife and I moved over to England, and I went to the University of Kent at Canterbury, and had lots of options as to where to go. But the reason we went there is that Stan Taylor had spent 6 months there as a visiting professor, and he thought that I should go there, and I wanted to do whatever Stan thought I should do. It turned out to be really, really useful, although I notice some of the things washed out, so I'll have to explain over them. I put limbo clouds at certain points, and just to explain, so whatever you end up doing, it's probably not going to be nonstop excitement all the time. You're not going to feel like you're progressing all the time, whether here at BYU or certainly after you graduate. And I felt that. So like to this day, I can't explain, other than Stan Taylor told me to go to University of Kent, I can't explain exactly how that changed my life. I met some wonderful people that I think we were influential in helping them, but I can't say that it changed my life materially, although maybe I'm wrong, because one day while I was, and this is the serendipity thing, one day while I'm sitting in Canterbury, my uncle comes to visit, and he brings this friend from Mitsui and Company named Rick. I'm sure that was not his real name. I doubt his Japanese mother gave him the name Rick. Sat on my couch. I talked with my uncle for 2 hours or so, and Rick slept on our couch, just kind of like hunched over, sleeping because he was jet lagged. At the end of the conversation, my uncle gets up to leave, and Rick kind of pops up and says, "You should come work for Mitsui." And I didn't have any idea as to what to do after getting an international conflict analysis degree. In fact, this is a theme throughout, and this is one of the things I kept trying to get different degrees that would give me a real job, and it turns out that your job, if you're studying international relations or whatnot, probably not going to get you a job directly. You have to be in the sciences or something like that. But I said okay, and I flew in April. We were out of school for the term break, and I flew to Silicon Valley and interviewed with Mitsui, got the job, and spent the next 2 years absolutely hating the job and being dirt poor, because $40,000, which may sound like a reasonable amount here, and $40,000 certainly then in Silicon Valley was poverty wages, and we lived on virtually nothing. And it was fantastic, actually, because it was one of the best experiences I've had in my life, having to live on what sounds like a lot, but which was really little in Silicon Valley. Hated the job. And I remember calling my mom and telling her how much I hated the job. And she said, "Well, you always wanted to go to law school. Why don't you go to law school?" Oh. And so I did. I applied, and I got into a number of schools, Stanford being one of them. And given that we had been out on Columbia campus, and somebody had gotten shot the morning that we were there, walking across the street, we said, "Yeah, Columbia may not be the right place for us. Let's go to Stanford. I don't think people get shot out in Palo Alto." And Stanford was one of the absolute formative experiences of my life. That place is the celestial kingdom. It is the Lord's school in every respect of the word. And I say that because at the law school, if you have kids, you don't pay tuition. Keep that in mind, because it's a diversity outreach program that they have. People of color, gay and lesbian, people with kids, boom. No tuition. So it was only the Mormons who didn't pay tuition. And there was one other couple I remember that had kids. The single students without kids hated it. Once they found out, they were like up in arms, and I remember having to have meetings about it. But Stanford was a wonderful place, and if you're interested in law school, have some children really quickly and then apply and go. Stanford was wonderful for me, but again, keeping with this theme of serendipity. So as a first year, it's hard to get an internship during the summer because no law firms want to hire you. And I knew from roughly the first hour of law school that I didn't want to be a lawyer. But you have to, and you will know this too, if you go to law school. But you have to get a job for the summer. And it's the easiest way to do that is you go back to your home market, which for me was Utah. And I remember talking with this friend. He was advising me on which law firms that I should interview with. And one day out of the blue, he says, "You shouldn't go work for a law firm at all. You should go work for my friend Matt Harris at this company, Lineo." And I thought, I don't know anything about software or open source, this open source thing that you're talking about. But I took the job as an intern. Maybe 2 or 3 weeks into the internship, it turned into a full-time job, and I worked the last 2 of my 3 years at law school full-time, and became a really not great student, but a pretty good employee at Lineo. And Wi-Fi in classrooms was the worst thing that ever happened to learning, because I sat there dutifully in class looking like I was taking notes while I was writing contracts or whatever in law school, all throughout law school. The other thing about Stanford is that they think they're so special that grade inflation is, everything's graded on the curve. It's very hard to fall off that curve. And the curve starts now, I think, an A-, because they said, well, of course, you're all so smart that everyone should be at an A-. And so it really didn't matter how hard you worked in class. It was very hard to get either better or worse than that. I can attest. But Lineo was the start of this open source career that I've ended up having. I didn't know when I was at BYU, I had no idea anything about technology. Open source had hardly been invented yet. It was just one guy, Richard Stallman, the guy dressed up like a saint. It was just him kind of thinking about it. I had no idea what I was going to do. I kept trying to get degrees to give me a job. And then once I had a degree that did lead directly into a job, I didn't want the kind of job that it led into. So again, coming back to, we think that we know what we want to do, and sometimes God has other plans. I think often he has other plans. So I was at Lineo, and it was fantastic. The first year went like this. This was in the middle of the dot-com boom. And my first day of work was going up to Seattle to work with the lawyers on our IPO. We had less than $1 million in sales. Now, just to kind of provide some context, normal companies in a normal time, you need to be profitable and have about $100 million in sales or revenue. We had less than 1 million, and we had like negative profits in the sense that we were burning through $60 million a year. And yet, this was such the time that they were going to take us public and we'd be worth billions of dollars, except the company cratered. And so I had to find a job. And one of the guys that I had hired, that I had hired and then had to fire at Lineo, offered me a job at Novell. And for those of you who maybe lived in Utah County, Novell was always this company that went through this fantastic period. And then for years and years, they just laid off everybody over and over and over again. And I didn't want to work at Novell, but in 2002, the economy was such that there just weren't that many options. It was a bad time to be in tech. So I went to Novell for security, and that became one of those time periods. We did some interesting things, but it became one of those holding patterns where we ended up moving from Utah County up to Salt Lake, and there were some things that were really important in our lives, but career-wise, it was limbo. To the extent that I was so bored, I started this open source conference, sold it to IDG, International Data Group, this large media company, tech media company, and then left to go join this open source startup based in London called Alfresco, which turned out to be the most fantastic work experience I've had. And the reason I went there is I wanted mentorship. And again, coming back to build your lives, build your careers around really smart people that know a lot more than you do. I would recommend that you do that. And I did. John Powell, the CEO at Alfresco, I learned everything. I didn't know how to do sales. I didn't know how to manage people. I didn't know any of these things. And he just said, I was the first employee in the United States, 13th employee overall, and he's just said, go do it. And it was a huge learning curve for me and a wonderful learning experience. I got bored after 4.5 years, felt like I had kind of tapped out. and went, and what doesn't show up here, but what are theirs, along the way I started writing, because I'm an English major, or was an English major, and I love to write. And so I started writing first for InfoWorld. They approached me and asked me if I'd blog for them. And then CNET, GigOm, now The Register, which is a UK-based tech media publishing house. And life was good on that score, and it helped me because I kept doing the blogging. I got this job at Canonical. That's the billionaire space guy, who turns out to be a great guy to have dinner with, a really bad guy to work for. And I spent a year flying over to London. This is one of these limbo times, flying back and forth from London, which sounds really sexy and cool, until you realize you're sitting in coach, knocking yourself out with a sleeping pill as soon as you get on, the plane starts to take off, and you wake up an hour from London and you feel, I was going there almost every other week. And I just never felt like, I never knew which time zone I was in. It was terrible. And I don't think my family liked it very much either. After roughly a year, I left and went to Strobe, which was another bad experience, but had positive outcome. I was made interim CEO at the end, and had to go through this process of selling the company. It turned out well. We sold to Facebook. But it was the process of getting there was just the hardest work experience of my life. It was terrible and fantastic at the same time. I needed a break. I went to Nodeable, which was run by a friend of mine, and we're in the process of selling that now, and fingers crossed it'll be sold within the next week or so. But it was another one of these holding patterns. And again, coming back to this, your career, your lives will go in fits and starts. During all this, it's not like my family just stopped and went into limbo. We had kids, and we had all sorts of drama in the neighborhood, and there's all sorts of things that are always going on. But career-wise, kind of the doldrums, the limbo land. And now I'm at 10Gen, and the primary criterion was, my wife said, if we're going to build onto our house, then you have to get a job that lasts for more than a few months. And so either that night or the next day, I reached out to a few companies, and the criterion had to be that they had either raised a lot of money or were making a lot of money, and that I could plan to stay there for a while. And hopefully that will be the case. So what? Black Swan, big unexpected event that has huge repercussions, and that after the fact we act like we knew it was coming. So think 9/11. People will, whether conspiracy theorists or not, will go back and say, oh, if we should have known it was coming. We had all the intelligence, and nobody knew it was coming, or else it would have been prevented. Things like this, the stock market crash in the 30s, the Great Depression, all these things, these big things happen. They're black swan events. There's no way to predict them. You look at all these things, all these quotations from these really smart people. They had no clue what was coming. And these were the best and brightest. They were in a position to know what was coming. And we have kind of some of the same. These aren't the same sorts of quotes, but the same sorts of things. People who had no clue what was coming in their life. They all thought they were going into the Foreign Service. They all thought they were going to be diplomats, and they all thought they were going to work for Greenpeace or whatever, and they didn't. Gordon B. Hinckley is actually my favorite. I couldn't find a great quote from him. That was from his mission, but here's a man who had all these talents as like a journalist and whatnot. That's what he wanted to be, and then God kept forcing him to be a prophet. And you have about as much insight into what you're going to do with your life as these people did at that time. So the point is not to become discouraged and give up on your dreams. That's not the point at all, because you need something driving you to do big and important things. It's just that you find out along the way that the big important things are very different from what you think they are. I thought it was important for me to be president of the United States. God and probably most of America would feel differently. So, no, I'll leave that up there so you can read it if you want. A few words of advice as you're going along. One, everyone is faking it. No one knows what they're doing. You get to a point where you kind of feel like, I'm not saying Professor Hawkins doesn't know what he's doing. I suspect he's a very good professor. But like as parents, as kids growing up, you think your parents are in control. The secret is they never are in any sort of control. And the slightest bit of coloring outside the lines, and it's a shambles. The police, we have like virtually no police. The second that everybody decided to stop obeying the traffic laws and whatnot, the world would be in chaos. Everyone's faking it. And in business, I've learned to be humble about what I don't know and to acknowledge what I don't know and to acknowledge that I'm faking it and to tell the person on the other side when I'm negotiating with them, I don't really know exactly what this deal should look like. Here's what I think. And I found that works. Humility goes a long way. Brand yourself. One of the things that I've been very fortunate to do, and it's because we are growing up in a time where writing actually matters. Being able to present yourself matters. And my email address, my Twitter account, my Facebook page, everything is MJ Asay. People say, what's the J for? I say, well, it's Matt and Jen Asay. And my wife is the opposite. Hers is JM Asay, but hers is not Jennifer and Matt Asay. Hers is Jennifer Minster Asay. One of us is very committed to the other. The other one is committed to her heritage. Some more advice. Share credit. You will find, so there's always a temptation to take credit for things that you probably deserve credit for. But whether you're managing people or whether you're working with people, I've found that as you give credit out, credit finds its way back to you. You don't have to be hoarding credit and be determined that everybody knows that you're the one who did that great thing. Give credit. Personal brand, I said that. And that's helped me so much throughout my career, whether it's the blogging, which I just started doing on my own personal blog, whether it's starting the conference, putting yourself out and doing things that, and this is in any industry, comes back and pays dividends. Never sacrifice principles. By that, I don't mean to be one of those jerks who doesn't compromise on anything. I think that's one of the problems that we see in politics right now is it's become so polarized and politicized. Every decision that people, if you read the biblical term, make a man an offender for a word, nobody can say anything or do anything that suggests at all that they're willing to compromise. Don't be like those jerks. But don't sacrifice your principles either. Have integrity. People respect that. And do what you love, but don't be stupid. So meaning, again, don't give up your ideals as to what's important, but understand that your understanding of what is important will probably change over time. As an example, I hate circuses and rodeos, and I'm not really an animal rights I'm not at all an animal rights activist, but I hate circuses because what I perceive as cruelty to animals. But I went to, because my youngest daughters wanted to go to the circus. My wife got tickets for them to go, and she was going to be gone, and so I was asked to go, and I happened to post something on Facebook, and a very sanctimonious and good neighbor friend saw it and said dislike and started lecturing me on, we'll call her Alex, Hannah, so that you know who I'm talking about. Started lecturing me on it about, how can you do that? It's so terrible. And I said, well, I don't like circuses for the same reasons you don't. She said, well, then why would you go? And I said, because I'm not the only person that matters in this equation. My wife matters in this. My kids matter. What they want matters. And so again, coming back to this, your ideals will change. What you think is truly important will change. And that may change your career. It may change what you decide to do with your lives. And that's actually a very good thing. It doesn't mean you've sold out. It means you've grown up. I had this, I've never had a problem with this one, but I remember Pam Carlin, one of the professors at Stanford, saying this, to read great literature. Now, granted, I was an English major, so I have some sort of a bias in this. Don't spend your time, you only have a limited amount of time if you're going to read literature, and you should, but you only have a limited amount of time. Don't read trash. Read stuff that endures. Read inspiring stuff. My daughter and I are reading, my eldest daughter and I are reading Dostoevsky right now, Crime and Punishment, and it's a wonderful experience reading that with her. We have lots of cool discussions that we wouldn't have reading Phineas or watching Phineas and Ferb, though she might find that more enjoyable, to be honest. This one, I was hoping Brigham Daniels, who teaches over in the law school, would be here. Kelly, his wife, is here. Send Christmas cards, and the greater principle is, I never sent a Christmas card in my life, and I hated reading people's Christmas cards. I hated reading this, we're so great, look at all the cool things that we did. But the principle of reaching out and keeping in touch, that personal paper, physical gesture of sending something out, turns out that it's a big deal. And I now my wife and I spend a lot of money every year sending out these Christmas cards because it's the way. And I have these work associates and whatnot that will constantly email me and say, I love your Christmas card. I look forward to it every year. The principle is to do things like that kind of set you apart. And frankly, sending an email is good, thanking somebody for something, but paper, because it's unexpected, is actually better. Do things like that to reach out to people. Again, you have no idea what God wants to make of you. So you have to kind of be open to changes in direction. You're a father, parent, sibling first. That principle, more than anything else, has affected what I've chosen to do with my life. I had this kind of life-defining moment maybe 2 years ago where I had to decide, I was hitting this point, at least title-wise in my career. I could easily be a CEO if I moved out to the Bay Area. Or I could stay here, which was good for my family, frankly good for me. I like to ski and bike. It was a hard decision. And ultimately, I think I made the right decision. Your decision may change, but so the principle is to put your family first. That principle is always right. No matter how important you think that career advancement is, it's not worth your family. Nothing is worth sacrificing your family. Lastly, we live in a super exciting time. So in the technology world, everything is changing. But the same is true of whatever industry you happen to be in, even I would say being a professor. Things are changing. We live in a fantastic time. It's a horrible time in some ways too. It's a scary time. But there's never been greater opportunities to lead the changes in these industries, whatever industry you happen to be in. And yes, some of you will end up in the Foreign Service. I should just look at one of you and say, you will end up in the Foreign Service, and the rest of you will not. So you live in a really good time. You have a time when you can make a huge impact on the world, and I would encourage you to do so. Thank you. Thanks for your time. We have a few minutes if you have any questions. If you don't, it's okay. But if you do, I'm happy to answer them. Yes, sir, the one who's going to the Foreign Service.
I really appreciate you coming here and sharing your insights with us. And I just wanted to ask you about law school. Did you like anything about it, and what did you like?
Yeah, you know what? So actually, I really loved some aspects of law school. Some of the classes I attended, and dutifully wouldn't miss them for the world. They tended to be the intellectual property classes because that happened to be relevant to my work. I loved constitutional law. I loved some aspects of it. So yeah, I did like law school. I may have gave the impression that I didn't. I just didn't want to come out as a lawyer. And so working full-time on the business side was important to me. But I think you have to go into it knowing what you want to get out of it. So if you want to be a professor, for example, coming out of law school, you need to work on law review. If you want to be a Supreme Court clerk, which gives you the best chances of getting a great teaching job, then you need to work your tail off and get on law review. You need to have perfect grades, etc. But it kind of depends on what you want to get out of it. If you don't want to do that, then there are lots of other ways to do law school. Sir?
Did you ever end up taking the bar?
I did. And I found that as easy as I thought it would be, because I was from Stanford, so of course I'd be able to pass the bar without studying. Turns out that that's a bad study strategy. So I passed it on the second time, yes. Yes.
I'd also like to thank you for your lecture. And I was wondering, you said that you got involved with writing because you've always liked to write. And what is your greatest writing accomplishment? And how did you manage to do that? Did you just do it after your work day or in free time?
So probably, you know what, actually the writing more than anything else has been, has done more than anything to advance my career, which sounds kind of weird, but it's the blog. And I just started writing. I mean, we happen to live in a time where that matters. And so I started writing on something that I liked, open source, and people started reading it, and then I found a way to make money from it. But if you like to write, you should keep a blog, or you should start a Twitter account or something. Twitter is a little harder because you have to be so succinct. But if you like to write, I would encourage you, you definitely should, about whatever topic is of interest to you. If it's international relations, you should start writing about that and find an angle for it. And as you link to other people, they start seeing the traffic come their way, and it becomes this reinforcing thing where good writing finds a way to be read. And we now live in, it's now gotten to the point, like with Huffington Post and these other things, where you can contribute articles. You aren't necessarily paid for them, at least not initially, but you can get an audience, and it's a big deal.
Thank you.
Sure.
So what exactly did you study at Kent, and what type of degree was that?
So it was a master's degree, international conflict analysis, which is kind of a fancy way of saying international relations. They have a program on conflict analysis where you do mediation, negotiation, stuff like that, but really it's international relations. And actually, so that's another thing, I didn't say that, but I loved going overseas and doing a degree, both for the experience. We had no money, so it wasn't very pleasant from that perspective. But it was fantastic they teach differently over there. The whole way that it's set up, the way that they lecture, the way that you're graded, how it all comes down to your final exam and nothing else. It was great. I loved the way that they taught there, and I would do that. I would encourage anyone, especially on internet. That's the other thing, is I quickly discovered, because nobody there were like maybe 3 Americans in the program, I quickly discovered that people weren't necessarily all that happy with the United States and the exercise of its power, and I hadn't really ever thought about that. So it was good to be in the minority, actually. If you like international relations, I would say go overseas. I think that's it. Thanks, you guys.
Great. Thank you.